Today I'm going to talk about contracting for agile software development. This is a notoriously difficult and many would argue inherently contradictory thing to achieve, but as agile software development becomes the standard way of producing software, something that we as software lawyers and IT lawyers are going to have to come to grips with. In essence, a commercial contract sets out in precise terms what will be delivered, how it will be delivered, how much will be paid for it, and how success will be measured. By contrast, agile software development involves a process where at the start of the process people have some kind of idea of what will be delivered, but no real concept of what the final outcome will be, no real concept of how they will get there, and therefore it is very difficult to determine with any certainty how much will be paid for it. And this contradiction between the traditional approach to IT contracting and the now fairly standard approach to producing software using agile methods is something that we as contract lawyers have to grapple with, and something I'd like to talk about today. So, if the point of agile software development is that you do not know what you're going to get when you start the process, and the point of a contract is to set out in precise terms what will be delivered, how, when, and for how much, we have a tension that we must address. Since there is no turning back from agile software development, we need to find ways of buying agile software development services from third parties without wiping out the benefits of the agile development methodology. So when assessing the software development landscape and the emergence of agile technologies and speaking to lots of programmers and developers, it occurred to me that the place to start is not with the detail of how agile software development projects are run, but go back to the first principles set out in 2001 rather conveniently in the Agile Manifesto. This was incredibly interesting to me as a lawyer because the traditional view of agile software development is that they reject contracts, they reject process. But in fact, if you look at what their manifesto sets out, they embrace it, but they embrace other aspects of the development process more. So, the Agile Manifesto, 2001, a group of developers came together and came up with the following principles. Through their work, they said, they had come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. But the key point to bear in mind is that they went on to say, while they value individuals, working software, customer collaboration, and responding to change over those other aspects, they recognize that the other aspects also have value. But what I take from that, what shines out to me from that manifesto, is that they value working software. And if we go back to the principles of old-fashioned IT contracts are also aimed at delivering working software. So once you have a manifesto and a methodology for software development that is all about delivering working software, you have something that you can ascribe value to, something that you can measure, and thus something you can contract for. Before we go on to consider how one might contract around the agile software development methodology, it's probably worth spending a couple of moments looking back at what agile software development methodologies involve. One of, if not the most common methodology applied, is the approach called Scrum, so called because everybody scrums in together to deliver the final project. What this methodology involves is an iterative approach of creating software. Each iteration is known as a sprint. Essentially, the team works together, runs together to deliver on a 2 to 4 week cycle the most important aspect to me of this whole process, the aspect known as potentially shippable product. Now, potentially shippable product takes us back to this concept of working software. A potentially shippable product means software that it is possible to ship, or in other words, install and run in a live working environment. And if you're running a process that every 2 to 4 weeks allows you to deliver software that you can then run and get value from, suddenly you really do have a methodology around which you can build a contract with some certainty around the metrics as to quality and performance. The next thing to bear in mind about the Scrum methodology is that as each potentially shippable product is developed and delivered, the team also maintains a product backlog. The product backlog identifies elements of the desired outcome that have not been achieved, that are to be achieved in the next potentially shippable product drop, or the one after that. Because as software is developed, bugs emerge and new avenues of development open up. This methodology allows the team developing it to decide to drop one aspect of the original project, stick it on the product backlog, and focus on achieving the wins that allow potentially shippable product to be finalised and delivered, again in these 2 to 4 week sprints. But they also give the team a defined list of what's not being delivered. So again, whilst the focus is on working software and the focus is not on big long lists and specification documents, etc., what you are nevertheless seeing is the creation of usable software and a clear set of terms and elements of delivery that have not been delivered, thus allowing the project team to understand exactly where they are at each stage of the process. Crucially, even if the intended final outcome is never achieved, throughout the process the customer achieves value, which means that throughout the process the supplier can be paid without the customer feeling hard done by. This is the crucial aspect that enables us to contract for Agile software, but despite that, contracting for it has proved incredibly difficult. What I want to consider next is why it has proved so difficult to contract for Agile software development projects, and then look at how we might develop approaches to enable us to contract for Agile software development projects without losing that value. The key driver for Agile software's popularity is that it delivers working software. The aim of any Agile contract should be to facilitate that delivery, without losing sight of the customer's crucial need for certainty that it will get that working software and that it knows within certain boundaries how much that working software will cost it. So that's easier to say but harder to achieve. What I see are 2 peaks of peril. Peril 1 is what I call the killing the goose that lays the golden egg. This is the approach of going back to a very over-engineered prescriptive contract. It drives the wrong behaviours and can cause the whole project to fail. But whilst that is bad, we must not forget the other peril, the hit and hope approach, where a contract that is far too light offers no certainty about what will be delivered or when it will be delivered, and no recourse if things go wrong. If we think about it, peril 1, the risk of creating a far too over-engineered contract, is something that's quite forgivable. It is how these contracts, software development contracts, have always been done. Customer negotiators are hardwired to want to bake into the deal what they're going to get and how much they're going to pay. Supplier negotiators, meanwhile, want to bake in as big a number as possible because their bonuses are driven by that, their reports to the stock market are driven by that. So if you have 2 teams of negotiators, both of whom want to bake in a big round number and a big load of deliverables, you are going to end up with a contract that builds in all the metrics that undermine the Agile process. We find ourselves with contracts full of milestone payments, liquidated damages regimes, detailed specification and design processes, and acceptance procedures. All of these are an anathema to Agile software development, but required if a customer is going to sign a contract with a big number and a salesman is going to book a contract with a big number. This whole approach drives an adversarial and destructive approach to contracting and an adversarial and destructive approach to delivery once the delivery teams are trying to work to that contract. But as I said before, you can't just hit and hope either. What you need to do is build a robust contract, but a contract that doesn't undermine the process. But to my way of thinking, the only way to do that is to build trust between the parties. How can we do that? Well, traditional IT contracts are based on years of bad experience. IT contracts are renowned for failure, cost overruns, failure to achieve objectives, chronic delays. For Agile contracts to work, customers must learn to trust their suppliers, and crucially, suppliers must have some kind of trust in their customers. Negotiators must pivot away from the traditional adversarial approach and build into the process of contracting the time to allow trust to develop. In other words, before you can make the contract agile enough to support Agile software development, you need to make the contracting process itself agile. This involves a variety of tasks, each of which takes time and some of which costs money. Unless you pursue some of these avenues, your project is more likely to fail. So, what are the approaches you can take to make your contracting process more agile? Firstly, you must take proper references. Not the kind of reference where you phone up a procurement person at a large organisation that's done business with your supplier. A process that sends your development people in to talk to your referees' development people to actually understand how it has worked on the ground on a day-to-day basis. Next, you must ensure that your delivery teams meet. I would argue this should apply to any software project or any IT project ever, but certainly in Agile it becomes crucially important. Your team and their team need to meet each other and to understand each other's competencies, understand the issues that might arise and work out if they can surmount those issues. Next, customers must carry out internal due diligence. What I mean by this, the customer organisation must assess its ability to develop software in an agile manner with a third party. This is something that many organisations fail to do, and often as not, one of the reasons for an agile project's failure is the customer organisation's inability to deal with the risks that are inherent to agile software development. Next, suppliers must be given the opportunity to carry out due diligence on the customer team and must be given the opportunity to give an honest assessment to the customers of how that team might perform. In other words, it's all very well the customer doing due diligence and thinking we can do this. The supplier needs to go in and say, no you can't, or yes you can, or you need to hire a project manager who knows what they're doing, who's worked on these kind of projects before, if we're all going to be able to work together successfully and effectively. Another thing to think about is considering some small-scale time and materials projects that, whilst there is a risk if they go wrong, the customer may be out of pocket, at least the customer and supplier will have established that they can work together or not, and the procedures they need to enable them to work together or not. And of course, the nature of these projects is that at the end of them, potentially shippable products should be delivered, so even a small-scale project should deliver some value. Finally, and most importantly of all, at some point in the process, the customer team needs to sit down and assess, in cold hard terms, can we do this? If they can, they should proceed, but if they can't, they should have the ability to pull out, to step back, without going down a process, a very expensive process of contracting and then engaging with the supplier to deliver something that may be crucially important, using an agile software development methodology that may just not work for them. What then are the metrics that an agile contract needs to have? You've carried out your agile contracting process and now you're coming to write an agile contract. I think there are a number of metrics. First and foremost, there needs to be clear, simple, team-level governance. Next, there needs to be a set of clear customer dependencies. Not the old-fashioned, our only dependency is to pay you on time, but clear customer dependencies. The customer needs to achieve this. The governance and the dependencies should be outcomes of the due diligence process carried out before you sign the contract. And next, there needs to be something on the supplier side, something to incentivize them, and that is a simple and clear way to identify the quality of these so-called shippable products, because that's the essence of it. If you have the shippable product being delivered every 2 to 4 weeks and it isn't actually shippable, then you have a serious problem. You need a way of measuring their shippability, to make up a new word. Underlying that is you need a clear escalation path if things start to go wrong on any of those aspects. A quick and simple way to escalate, and an escalation point who is empowered to make decisions and is aware enough of the process and procedures being followed to make an informed decision. And finally, and perhaps most controversially, you need a fast and fair way for the contract to be brought to an end. You need something that allows the customer to get out of the contract without paying a huge termination penalty, but equally the customer must realise that if it is going to have a fast and easy way out of the contract, the supplier may need some recompense while it reassigns its team from that customer's project to another customer's project. And finding that commercial balance on that exit payment is often the most fraught part of properly contracting for agile software development. But if the ability to exit for both parties is a little bit painful, then it keeps people honest through the escalation process. But if it's too painful, it drives people into defensive behaviours, negative behaviours, and undermines the whole process. Finally, you need to think about payment methodologies. There are a number around. The traditional time and materials approach is one. This, of course, does get closer to the hit and hope approach. You pay the supplier, they deliver. But provided you've got the get-out clauses, the governance, the escalation, and the explicit understanding that every 2 to 4 weeks there should be some potentially shippable product, it might not be that much of a risk, provided both parties trust each other. But most people prefer fixed price these days. One approach is to link a fixed price to the sprint. Each 2 to 4 week sprint has a fixed price. Each 2 to 4 week sprint has an outcome. That outcome might be different to the one set out at the beginning, but the outcome will be shippable product and a clear product backlog, both of which are valuable. Or some kind of hybrid methodology where you have a fixed price with a true up or true down payment process linked to time and materials costs. So if delivering the potentially shippable product only takes 2 weeks, then there's a true down, the supplier is paid less, but if it takes 5 weeks or a load more person hours to develop it, they get some true up within boundaries. Again, each of these will be negotiated on their own, but provided the trust is there, provided the due diligence has been done, these processes ought to be manageable. So to sum up, and with apologies to the authors of the Agile Software Manifesto, I have come up with my own Agile Contract Manifesto. One might argue that to realise the benefits of agile software development, contracts need to value escalation over service credits, due diligence over warranties, indemnities, and all that other penalty regime you see in a traditional contract, and understood pricing methodology over fixed pricing, and ease of termination over termination for cause. But just like the real manifesto, we mustn't forget that the items that we value most are not valued to the exclusion of the items we value less. All have value. And if we can remember that all have value, but focus on ensuring that the key values of escalation, due diligence, a certain basis of pricing, and ease of termination are enshrined in the contract, then we should be able to design, build, and negotiate contracts for agile software development that deliver the benefits of agile and deliver the benefits of a contractual framework that gives certainty to both parties about how they will work together. It works sometimes, not every time, but it's got to work better than applying the traditional approach to an agile software development project. Thank you very much.